Today I'm going to talk about Beary, but I thought I'd start out with a pretty cool event that happened recently, the 2024 solar eclipse. It was really exciting to hear that we were going to be in the path of totality for the 2024 April eclipse, but I had a feeling it wouldn't go well. There had been a partial eclipse earlier in the year that I'd been home for on a clear day, but I totally missed it. To make it worse, my desk is next to a window, and I saw it get weirdly dark weirdly fast. I glanced out the window and there wasn't a cloud in the sky. I couldn't see the sun from where I was sitting, but I thought it was odd. I remember thinking that there must be some partial clouds near the sun, and I didn't think any more about it. We weren't in the path of totality, so it didn't get the spooky nighttime dark, just darker like a thunderstorm. But it wasn't enough to make me get up and see what was going on. I guess it was a few hours later I started to see photos of half-moon shadows on my social media feed, and I wondered what that was. Then I realized it was the partial eclipse that I'd totally missed. I was sad about it, but there was nothing for it. It was what it was. So when I heard another eclipse was coming, and that the cottage was going to be in the path of totality, I was, as I mentioned, excited. But then I thought that with my luck, I'd somehow miss it. And my first thought was, watch it be completely cloud covered that day. Fast forward to April, and sure enough, the forecast called for a total cloud cover with a chance of rain. We watched the weather every day, and every day there was no change in the forecast. And the morning of the event, it was heavy, dark gray clouds everywhere. But what I thought would ruin the event actually helped. There was a lot of cloud cover, but it wasn't so thick that it completely obscured the sun, and as a result, the clouds acted as a filter and they let me get some good images with my phone, but also I was able to see it directly a lot of the time. It looked a lot like a moon phase, but more intense because the sun is so much brighter. Also, when the sun was ultimately obscured, the difference between the normal day and the cloudy day and a near total eclipse was eerie. Just to be clear, when the sun was nearly all covered, the light was about like when you have a really big thunderstorm roll in. And this is what it looked like all the way up until the whole thing was covered. Then it was suddenly dark like nighttime. I think the thing that really drove it home for me was that immediately once it got dark, I saw a spark in the air near me, like a floating ember, and I realized it was a confused firefly. It was the only one I saw, but then I saw the neighbor's solar lights come on, and I ran to see the solar street lights, and sure enough, those had come on as well. It was incredibly interesting. And it stayed that way for about 3 minutes for the entire time the sun was completely obscured. So, to be clear, most of the eclipse was just varying shades of daylight as it got darker and darker as the sun was covered more and more. But it was totally covered where we were in the path of the totality for about 3 minutes. And for that part of the event, it was dark, like night. I've seen solar eclipses before, but this was the first time in my life I was in the totality, which was a very different experience. It really was eerie. Even though we see the day turn to night every evening, and even though we see the moon phases, which are a very regular and similar event, there's something about seeing it happen like someone flipped a light switch and turned off the sun, being in this nighttime darkness in the middle of the afternoon. It really was an awesome experience, and I'm so lucky to have had it, to just happen to live where it occurred. I wanted to at least take a moment to mention that event and also show some of the images I was able to get of it while I was watching it. I'm really happy to be able to share this. But beyond the mystical celestial events that happen around here from time to time, we have the mundane stuff too, and that's where Beary comes in. As I've mentioned before, we have a lot of cats here at the cottage. Inside there are 5 tabbies and 1 void, which I understand is what black kitties are now called. Outside there were 2 regulars coming around that seemed friendly, a Russian blue male that I called Bear, and a little black female kitty that I just called Black Kitty. Those were the regulars, but there were a few others, another Russian blue that was Bear's doppelganger, a large tabby with a shortish tail, and a huge fluffy long-haired black kitty. The other Russian blue, the not bear one, was another male, and so was the tabby. I couldn't tell with the huge long-haired black one, but I assumed, due to its size, that it was also male. But not just size. For all three, Bear would not tolerate them in the yard. He only tolerated the black kitty, the little female, who unfortunately looked very pregnant. This was back in winter, and although I've brought in a few pregnant cats before, she was so big that I figured it was best to let her have the litter and deal with it when it happened. So after a while, she showed up looking a lot less huge, and we had some hard winter days. We don't get many here in Austin, but we do get some ice and hard freezing, and even snow every few years. The few bad days that we get have gone from a few every couple winters to a few days every winter as climate change has progressed, and it seemed that she had dropped her litter right about the worst of the worst. The cottage is located in a suburb, and in some areas around us there's a lot of underdeveloped land. All of it is being quickly developed, and a lot of wildlife comes into the neighborhood. We get some deer, some raccoons, possums, the occasional fox, and now and then a coyote. One of my cats, a tabby named Rain, lives inside with her baby, who is just named Baby. I took her in to be spayed, not realizing that she was nursing. The vet had told me he thought there was a chance she was still nursing, but he wasn't sure. Still, he suspected she was through. But Rain was absolutely wild to get out of that cage. I tried to keep her 2 nights, but finally I had to set her loose because she was so distressed in the condo. It's not a small cat condo, but it is still confinement, and some ferals don't do well in confinement, but she was particularly distressed. So between that and feeling guilt from suspecting she had a litter, I finally just let her back out. She started coming back around, and she showed up after a while with a single small kitten. I still don't know if keeping her inside for 2 nights might have resulted in the loss of some of her kittens, but after we caught the kitten and got him neutered and got them both inside the cottage, they actually warmed up to us and are very friendly. They can be petted, and Baby even walks with me in the mornings when I get to feed them all their breakfast. He weaves his way through my legs, left, then right, then left, then right, rubbing inside my calves all the way into the kitchen. And that's actually a little nerve-wracking because I usually feed them first thing after getting up in the mornings, which means negotiating a cat weaving between my morning legs while it's still dark out and I'm not even totally awake yet. Anyway, Little Black Kitty was living outside completely feral and had dropped her kittens in the dead of winter. I decided to give her a few months to nurse and wean the kittens, and I wondered when she'd start bringing them around with her like Rain brought Baby to the cottage. But she never did. Black Kitty continued to show up sporadically but never brought any kittens. Whether they froze outside or were picked off by predators, I have no idea, but we never saw them. I always thought it was odd that she fell pregnant during the middle of winter, but I guess losing the kittens made her available again to the neighborhood toms. And while I was waiting for her to finish nursing and wean the kittens, that I don't think existed at this point, she was getting busy again, and before I knew it, while I was waiting on kittens to come with her, she showed up pregnant again. At first I thought maybe I was just imagining it, but it seemed early on, and I decided that if she was pregnant again with spring coming and she wasn't nearly as far along as the first time we saw her, I could take her in for spaying. While this whole saga was unfolding, and while we were focused on Black Kitty's situation, which was far more urgent, I kept thinking that after we got Black Kitty spay, we could trap Bear and then get him neutered as well. But someone forgot to explain that plan to Bear, because one morning Bear shows up limping badly, with one of his forelegs horribly swollen. It was shocking. Not just a little swollen, but extremely swollen to probably 4 times its normal size. I went online to see what could cause it, and my fear was that it could be a broken bone. The leg didn't look awkward, but it was so swollen it was hard to tell. Online, it indicated that if swelling persists for 24 hours, then it should be looked at, so I waited. But the next day he showed up and the swelling was reduced, but he was limping more, and I decided to bring him in. So I caught him in the life trap and I brought him to the ER vet clinic. This summary really doesn't do it justice. With feral cats, it's nerve-wracking to me, because not only do I have the stress of not knowing what exactly is wrong, but I can't handle the cat at all. It isn't going to come close to me, so I can't see what's going on. All I knew was that the leg appeared to be at a normal angle, it had been alarmingly swollen, and then when the swelling went down, there was a substantial limp, and even holding the paw up so as not to put any pressure on it. Again, not being able to handle Bear meant trapping him, which puts added stress on an already stressed animal. And with an ER visit, the cat sometimes has to be in the trap for a while before it can be seen at the clinic. It meant going to the vet and basically spending a good part of my night there. I'd done this before with other cats, and now it was Bear's turn. The woman at the ER clinic was amazing. She came in with a sheet, and after just a little bit of calmly walking after Bear, she was able to corner him and get him wrapped in the sheet, burrito style. She was very good with him, and she was able to get a weight and to get him sedated and into an exam room. My biggest fear was that something would be wrong that would require some treatment. There would be no way I could take care of Bear at home. And also, I had to ask myself mentally, while all of this was going on, exactly how much money I could drop on a feral cat's veterinary needs. It's horrible to have to weigh money with the life of an otherwise healthy animal that could be treated and cured. But it's a reality, especially today when vet costs are so high in the US that, like human medical needs, we now buy insurance to cover medical fees for our pets. And Bear wasn't even my pet. I was, however, willing to cover some cost. I just was dreading hearing that it was a break or something extensive and costly and having to make that tough decision. I hadn't noticed any bleeding, but apparently Bear had a serious infected wound on the inside of his foreleg that looked like it had come out of a fight with another animal. Additionally, as they shaved him down to access it, they saw another, and another, bite wounds all the way up to his shoulder. They also checked the other leg and found a wound there as well. Initially, I had suspected another Russian blue cat that I see occasionally that has had hostile run-ins with Bear before. But after hearing about the severity of it, I suspect a raccoon. I've seen a few come around at night, and they're pretty large. There are a few feral cat houses out back, and I've heard fights near them. I actually think Bear might have been inside of one of the houses when he was confronted by the raccoon, and he had nowhere to retreat. It's why I'm now looking at houses with 2 openings. They're not as easy to insulate, but they provide an escape hole if a predator comes along. So when the vet was done, they said they'd cleaned it all out, given him a course of antibiotics that I wouldn't need to administer since they were topical. But I would need to keep him observed at home for a few weeks indoors and take him to my own vet several days in to get the wound checked and make sure it was healing okay. This sounded a lot less extensive than a bone break, but it was still pretty costly. I balked at the bill, but I paid it, and I took Bear home. I have a large cat condo, in fact I have 2, for occasions like this one. Before heading home, I called and asked my roommate to help set it up, but they said they were in bed, and that's as much as I got out of them. So I came home, set up the cat condo, put in some food and water, a folded towel, and a small litter box, and then I had the chore of transferring Bear from the pet carrier that I had asked the vet to return him in, since the trap is extremely bulky, into the condo. The cats never seem to want to get out of the carrier, which isn't surprising since it's a place they can hide, and coming out means exposure, and the cat condo is foreign to them. I do cover the condo, but still it's intimidating. Finally, a groggy Bear lumbered out of the carrier and into the condo. I shut and secured the door, and then left him in the dark room alone for the night, hoping he could try to convalesce without the other cats bothering him or having a scary human in the room. Unlike a person, though, being confined in the condo is weird for them and also stressful. They don't know it's temporary, and that means they can sometimes panic. Usually the first day or 2 is when it's worse for ferals. But poor Bear was going to be confined for 2 weeks. And during that time, I was going to have to figure out how to get him out of the condo and to my regular vet for a checkup. And what if the antibiotics didn't work and he needed more treatment? Would I have to make the tough call anyway after dropping a big load of money on him already? I guess there's only so much that can be done and there's no point to worry about it. So I started looking at videos online of how to transfer a feral cat. I actually found some good material that I'll share in the description. There's a whole system made by a company called Tomahawk that looks great. I haven't tried it, so I can't speak to how well it functions, but it appears that they make the traps and carriers and holding all to spec so that they all fit together for easy transfer. In fact, preemptively, I ordered one of their transfer cages, but it took a long time to arrive, well after the planned vet appointment. I had no clue how to get Bear from that condo back into a carrier, and nothing online helped. There was one tutorial that showed how, if there was nowhere to hide and the feral is confined, that they will go into the carrier on their own to hide. And that's great, except the pet carrier doesn't fit inside the opening of my condo. I couldn't figure it out. This may sound odd because I've handled all kinds of cats before, including a lot of TNR cats, the ferals that I've taken in for trap neuter release. But in those cases, once the cat has spent a few nights inside and they seem okay, they're just released right back outside. And I've never had one with complications before, so I never needed to transfer a feral cat out of the condo and into a carrier. Logistically, it's not an easy puzzle to solve. So I reached out to a couple of local feral cat groups to ask for help, ideas, or actual boots on the ground to come over and give me a hand if they know how to deal with this situation. I offered a donation to the group if they could assist me, because that often helps to grease the wheels. I saw it work a lot when I needed help with placement for strays when I've lived in apartments and could only have 2 cats inside. One group never responded, but one group did. And a very helpful woman named Elizabeth got back with me. She said she'd be happy to come over to personally help with the transfer. I felt immediate relief to have someone coming over who knew how to handle feral cats. My initial plan was to set up my camera stand so I could film the transfer, but I was so nervous about the process that I totally forgot to do it. However, that may be a good thing because things didn't go exactly as planned. But I was curious how she'd manage it. When she arrived, the first thing she wanted to do was try and get a carrier into the condo, but I explained it wouldn't fit. I had 4 carriers, but even the smallest one wouldn't go through that door. The door in the condo is actually pretty large, but it's not quite large enough to get a carrier in. Initially, I had removed the shelves to remove all the potential hiding places or spaces where he might want to go to get away from us, so that we'd never be able to reach him. I asked if I should remove them, and Elizabeth said yes. However, that turned out to not be such a great idea in this case, because we ended up dismantling the carrier in order to reach into the condo to assemble it, which was incredibly awkward. But more importantly, Bear was super stressed out and attempted to climb the walls of the cage, which really wasn't feasible. But he was trying, and in the process, I was scared he was going to hurt himself even more. At one point, he was literally hanging from the top of the cage by nothing but his claws. At that point, I stopped the process and said we needed to put at least one shelf back in so that Bear had a way to escape the floor of the kitty condo where I was trying to assemble the carrier. It was just too frightening for him. I really don't think that part of the process would have made for good footage because it was actually distressing to witness in real life, and I'm sure it would be distressing for viewers. So, as I said, all of this was probably not something I would have felt comfortable sharing or exploiting for the channel once it was done, even if I had filmed it. But I got the carrier reassembled on the floor of the condo, and then I had to reach into the top condo door to take out the shelf that Bear was still hiding on. I felt really bad disrupting his safe space to force him down to the scary floor again, but we had to get him into the carrier for his appointment, so I took the shelf away, and Bear jumped down to the floor, And just like in the videos online, he creeped into the carrier to hide. I grabbed the door handles and shut it and locked it. And that part went incredibly smoothly. Until Elizabeth wanted to confirm it was secure. I said it was, that you could see the latch was secured, but she wanted to tug on the carrier door, which is basically just a cage grid-style door. Rather than grabbing the handles, though, she pinched one of the bars, which put her thumb and forefinger inside the carrier. And that's when the whole thing went haywire. Bear, who had nowhere else to retreat, attacked. Not with his claws. He bit Elizabeth. He bit her so hard that when she yanked her hand away from the carrier was actually dragged along and lifted up because Bear had his teeth latched into her hand that hard. Elizabeth let out a yowl and was very shaken up, literally shaking, in fact, and flushed and upset. There was some scrambling around, with Elizabeth apologizing for bleeding all over my floor and me panicking and trying to figure out what to do. We rushed to the bathroom where we had peroxide and alcohol and bandages, and the wound was bleeding pretty profusely. We rinsed the hand and actually squeezed it to let out the blood for a while because cat bites are notoriously infectious. Elizabeth was still visibly shaken and saying she'd never been bit that bad before. Whenever she mentioned the blood, I told her not to worry and that I could deal with it later. The important thing was that she should be treated and okay. Eventually, we did flush it out with alcohol and bandaged it so that the bleeding finally stopped, but so many things were going through my mind. I won't lie, part of me was afraid of liability, that I might end up with big medical bills over a cat that wasn't even mine. But mainly, I was just hoping Elizabeth would be okay. I wanted to make sure of that. Also, she had come over early because she had another appointment to go to after she helped me, and I felt as though this incident had really screwed up her plans, whatever they were. Still shaken, she insisted on leaving, and I'll get back to that in a bit. I cleaned up the blood in the bedroom and the bathroom, and then I dismantled the condo around the pet carrier, and I got the carrier into the car, and then we were on our way to the vet. They had told me it was okay to bring him in early if needed, and they would do their best to get us in so Bear didn't stay too long in the carrier. I warned Dr. Bob and the assistant that Bear was distressed and had already bitten someone. So they sedated him for the exam, and they said everything looked okay. And they asked about vaccines and neutering. Dr. Bob said he was surprised that Bear hadn't been neutered at the ER when they did the tending to the wound. I explained that most ER vets that I've been to won't spay or neuter, and he just thought that since Bear was already sedated there, they should have handled it, but he went ahead and took care of it for me. We couldn't do the rabies vaccine because Bear had bitten someone. I was told that the law required that he be held in quarantine for 10 days for observation. I noted that he had already been held in quarantine for more than a week already, and that by the time his 2 weeks was up, the time frame the ER had given me, he'd be well past 10 days. Not 10 days past the bite, but if the point was that he should be observed for 10 days in order to see if he has symptoms that come up, he'd been with me several days before the bite. Logistically, to me, it didn't make sense to hold him more than the 14 days if the symptoms show up in 10. Even though the bite had just occurred, he'd been in quarantine for nearly 10 days already and was asymptomatic. Before I'd left the cottage, I had asked my roommate if they could reassemble the condo so it would be back together when I came home. Fortunately, they were able to help at this time, and so when I got home, I just had to urge Bear back into it, and then it was back to the condo routine for another few days until he could be released. I did hear back from Elizabeth as well, and she had decided right after she left to be cautious, and she went to see a doctor about the bite. She'd been treated and given antibiotics to be on the safe side, and that made me feel good to know that she wasn't just waiting to see if it would become infected. She also asked me about holding Bear for 10 days, and we discussed it, and she agreed with me that he'd been quarantined the whole time before the bite, so the remaining few days should be fine. I made a big donation to their feral cat organization, and I thanked them profusely and apologized for the bite situation. Elizabeth, although it had been somewhat traumatic, was very understanding and took it in stride as being part of her work with feral cats. So Bear served out the remainder of his sentence with good behavior, and Elizabeth's hand continued to mend, and after Bear was released, something I do wish I had filmed, I managed to catch the little black female as well and have her spay. I asked the vet if she was in fact pregnant, as she looked early on, and he said she looked to be almost halfway through the pregnancy at that point. So I still have no idea what happened to her first litter that she dropped during the hard winter months, but she did get pregnant quickly afterward. At least now she won't be having any more kittens. And she and Bear both come around pretty regularly for canned food and cream. It's a tough world out there for ferals, but I do try to do right by them as much as I can in my little part of the world here at the cottage at Woodland Corners. If you enjoy this cottage content, feel free to drop me a comment on your own kitty adventures, and be sure to like and subscribe for more content about life at the cottage at Woodland Corners.